Hello everybody, Marcus Godwyn here with the Noise of Time SHOOM VEREMENY blog from St. Petersburg, Russia. Behind me you can see the iconic statue of the bronze horseman Peter the Great, the man who founded this amazing city, but a man in many ways who has an awful lot to answer for in Russian history. The consequences of many of his actions are still living with us now, including at this very moment when I speak. It's now just a couple of days ago since the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, made his annual message to the National Assembly, I think it's called, and the people in the world in general. This message was very much concentrated on domestic affairs, but there were a few clear messages for foreigners and foreign states and so on and so forth. However, one thing I wasn't aware of, when I decided to go shopping at 9 o'clock that evening, the very same evening, it was Wednesday evening, 2 days ago now, I noticed that for a cold and rainy Wednesday evening in the middle of St. Petersburg, there are actually an extraordinarily large amount of young people kind of on the streets. Some looking excited, some looking a little bit perturbed, so on and so forth. I turned the corner, walked through a few minutes to what's known as Gorokhovaya Street, and there I saw a massive police presence. I mean, really massive. And in the Haymarket Square, Senaya Ploshchad, there was even bigger police presence. And then I realised something must be going on. Then I thought, of course, they've timed some kind of demonstration, or as the Russians call a demonstration, meeting. Confused? Yeah, but they're not. Yeah, they know what a meeting is, and so do we. And sure enough, the more I walked around, the more I realised that there were just many, many young people, not in any particular order, not in any particular block, going this way and that, all of them checking telephones non-stop for information. And one thing that was very strange and unusual, but was clearly a pre-planned tactic, nobody looked like a typical demonstrator. Nobody was carrying any placards or any slogans of any kind whatsoever. Nobody was shouting anything. So you wouldn't really know. The only thing is, because, that's where I kind of go around every day, is where I live. There were just too many, especially young people on the street. And sure enough, in various places, it was possible to see that there was a kind of movement going on. I saw zero violence of any kind or even real tension in the air. However, how to say this is clearly a quite heavily planned action. When I got home, I looked on the computer and on the news and so on, and I understood that this was going on in all cities of Russia. The biggest one, of course, was in Moscow, but even from the Far East and so on. So it's the rekindling of the whole Navalny affair. Now, we've been led to believe that Navalny is at death's door. That's rubbish. By all accounts, he's been tweeting himself, "I'm perfectly okay." And today came the news that he's given up his hunger strike, if there ever really was a hunger strike, quite frankly. Which, of course, is good news, but I never dreamed for one second that he would go all the way, because he's simply not a man of any conviction whatsoever. And which brings me on really to the whole history of Russia coming full circle in some ways at the moment. If you remember last week, I mentioned that it was looking as if there was going to be a kind of coordinated attack in Ukraine, together with an attempt at some colour revolution or massive demonstrations here, and also in Belarus, and maybe something in Syria, possibly Moldova, all at the same time. Well, the good news is that, as far as I can see, due 100% to the massive Russian retaliation, i.e. equal and opposite mobilization of the Ukrainian forces around Donbass in the east of Ukraine, Russia mobilized very heavily, and in Crimea, that Ukrainians were threatening to attack too, of course with the full backing and public backing of NATO, but also with NATO advisors on the ground and a huge amount of NATO taxpayers' money. That threat seems to have been called off for the time being, anyway, for the foreseeable future. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister apparently first said that taking Donbass by force is no longer an issue, it's not on the table. Again, yesterday it was announced that the Russian troops are all, having finished their exercises, and Navy and Air Force on, are all returning to their respective bases. Meanwhile, in Belarus, an attempt to assassinate the president and his entire family on Victory Day, which will be on the 9th of May, was uncovered and thwarted with arrests and so on, and the investigations are now going on. I've read a couple of very detailed articles by people with inside knowledge about this who say that the Americans will still be wondering whether some generals who they thought were on their side were stooges all the time, and the Russians are simply just going to let them wander. So this is also extremely good news. It means that a serious attempt at a staged coup in Belarus and the hiving off of Belarus from the Russian world and from the Christian Orthodox world also cannot happen in the immediate future. So it seems. Again, I'm not an expert on the military side of things, but I've read some pretty detailed articles by people who apparently are. So that leaves, really, they've only got one immediate chance left, and that is to try and remove Vladimir Putin from power this year. These demonstrations, pro-Navalny and so on and so forth, it's so difficult because, I look at the faces of these young people, and as I said the other night, they clearly know nothing really about what's going on whatsoever. They don't understand they're being manipulated completely and totally by the Western secret intelligence services and those who are behind them, who are basically the controllers of the Western central banks and what some people call the New World Order, and so on and so forth. There is just a huge amount of naivety. And the trouble is, as I've said before, these young people are not watching any content whatsoever from Russian television. None. They are exclusively watching Western content on internet and proudly proclaiming, we don't get brainwashed because we don't watch television, but they get brainwashed by Western content, which has very, very subtle, subliminal ways of hypnotizing people and quite literally brainwashing them. At the moment, we have an excellent series on mainstream television, on Россия 24, Russia 24, which is the Russian language international news service, but it's watched by quite a lot of people here too, called Gibel Imperi, The Death of the Empire, by Metropolitan Tikhon. And this is a breakthrough in some ways, because it's the first time in many years that the actual truth is being told about Nicholas II and the success of his reign, and that the lies are being undone, and also the truth that the two putsches in 1917, in February and then in October, totally financed by the same Western banking cabal and so on, who are financing Alexei Navalny today. Basically, these were able to happen because of two things. Ordinary people in the Russian Empire at that time, who quite literally had never had it so good in any way, shape or form, were convinced that somehow by propaganda, by the fact that the Russian media of the day, primarily newspapers, of course, and magazines and pamphlets, was totally controlled by the West, above all the British, by all accounts. They believed they were having a terrible time, and that they needed to get rid of this old-fashioned autocratic system of government and replace it by some kind of freedom and democracy and all this kind of stuff. So plus many of the ruling elites around the Tsar and around the power betrayed him. They betrayed him just at the moment when Russia was about to win its side, the eastern side of the First World War, regain Constantinople for orthodoxy out of the ashes of the collapsing Ottoman Empire. The West didn't want that at all.